Folks. So competing theories of cognitive development in children. So this is something that, you know, I'm talking about usually like a little bit of season 17, season 18, etc. But we're going to be going in a little bit different direction. Now, typically with the conferences, I save some content that I haven't talked about at all in any of the lectures, and I kind of save it specifically for the audience, within the context of the conferences. But for this time, we're going to be talking about cognitive development in children and the two competing theories. I'm actually going to be doing specific lectures to kind of flesh these out a little bit, but I wanted to actually talk about them, specifically, in this particular case. So, for example, we know that right now, children, they develop differently. When and the current main theory, at least the theory that I like to espouse, right, is or exposit upon, is basically children, they're born with a quadra, right? And a quadra is, so like we have the SFP NTJ quadra, which means they're SENI, they're FITE, they have those four cognitive functions within their ego, right? And that's very normal, for that quadra. Only 4 of the 16 types within that quadra. There's also the STP NFJ quadra, there's the STJ NFP quadra, and then there's the SFJ NTP quadra, with 4 of the 16 types attached to each of those quadras. And basically this theory is that, okay, a child is born, they have their quadra, and they can move freely within that quadra and basically become any of those 4 types with their associated shadows, unconscious, subconscious, superegos, etc., with each of 4 of those types. Very fantastic to be able to have that opportunity, right? Now, looking back, anecdotally speaking, I remember, when I was very young, I was more ISFJ. I really was more ISFJ growing up, and up until the point actually that my sister was born. So the event of my sister being born, and I remember the exact day, and I was standing in the bathroom, and I just remember like having this transformative experience where I basically became, somebody else. And I went from my ISFJ side and I became an ENTP, basically. And it was mostly because my sister, she is an SFJ. And it was having to compete, for that attention, from my parents. And basically the lack of attention as an SI hero for an ISFJ was a bit of a traumatic experience for me. And as a result of that, I was like, you know what, fine. If I have to be all about what everyone else wants, then that's what I'm going to do, right? So I became this ENTP person. I did what we call a quadra shift, right? And I shift into the ENTP side of my quadra, where I remained up until the point I was about 5 years old. And at 5 years old, that's when my sexual abuse started kicking in. I was abused by family members. I was also being abused by my church as well, because my church was a very unhealthy, abusive environment, not sexually, at least not for me. That's another story for other people. But my sexual abuse in my life is actually more centered around my family, as I had shared in the season 21 episode for how to social engineer ENTPs. But be that as it may, I was done quadra shifting, and then I went into my INTJ shadow to basically cope with the abuse. Don't forget, when you're presented with like a lot of trauma in your life, a lot of negativity in your life, people typically go into do a regular cognitive shift or a cognitive transition into the deeper side of their mind, which is their unconscious. And I was like this unconscious INTJ basically for the rest of my life. And it was that, and I was stuck in that side of my mind because of all the negativity and the trauma and the abuse. That I wasn't able to actually come out of it till I was about 26 years old. And what happened at 26? I became completely independent of my family, left my church, left everything. And I was completely alone. Finally got to a point where I was able to isolate myself such that there was no external influences, especially negative external influences on my life, such that because of that lack of negative external influence, my mind or soul was able to begin the process of healing to get out of my INTJ unconscious and into my ENTP ego, right? Now let's break that down a little bit more, because don't forget, like, if you have a child and let's say they've quadra shifted a few times and whatnot, either due to positive things or negative things, because there is some positive quadra shifts. Like, you can argue that Taylor Swift had some positive quadra shifts because she's a very subconscious focused ESFP. She's more strategic with what she does, in terms of her performances and whatnot, through her INTJ subconscious. And she's been very subconscious focused in her life, which basically went in that direction. But beyond that, we find ourselves looking at how children, when they hit adolescence, that's the cutoff. I mean, that's specifically the cutoff right there. I mean, it's basically, over with at that point. So realize just how important that is. The cutoff, because when you hit adolescence, you lose the potential of quadra shifting or exploring those other 4 types within your quadra to actually like be another person. Now, most children, they don't quadra shift. Most children, the ego that they're born with is the ego that they have, and they just go through adolescence. And once they hit adolescence, okay, boom, that's their cutoff. That's their ego. Their super ego is fully formed. And then that's their personality for the rest of their lives. Of course, obviously, like, head trauma after the fact can cause a quadra shift, and then they're like a completely different person at that point in time. Fair enough, right? But beyond that, it gets a little bit more interesting, because let's say, in my life, had I not had that trauma, could I still be an ENTP? Could I have been an ESFJ, right? Could I have been an INTP, right? So there's a lot of missed potential there as a result of the abuse in my life. And honestly, there's a lot of other children or human beings out there who all share these same issues, who all have these same complications, right? From which that they have to deal with on a regular basis. Well, let's consider that a little bit more. In comes the other theory. Now, about a couple weeks ago, I had spoken to my INFJ mentor on the phone, and let me see if I can bring up my notes here from that conversation. But from our conversation, he shared his theory, because what I've just expressed to you already with quadra shifting and being a quadra within within the context of a child and child development, he actually offers a different theory. So while my theory is based off of anecdotal evidence, it's also based off of what I have observed of my own children. I remember bringing my son home from the hospital. He didn't want to have anything to do with us. He didn't want to sleep with us. He wanted to sleep in his own crib alone, be left alone by himself. He was like introverted. Leave me be. I want to be by myself. And I was like, cool, great. I don't have to deal with you sleeping in my bed then. You can go sleep in your own crib, because he wasn't having it. He wanted to be left alone. And so he's pretty introverted. And then we start to figure out, his cognitive functions. He was very movement oriented. You can compare this baby's behavior to other more control based babies in the nursery and be like, okay, yeah, he's obviously movement compared to the control ones who are just kind of like super mega reserved and just kind of like meh. You know what I'm saying? All you have to do to really type children is just put them around other children and notices the differences. That's all you have to do to type children. Like, just put them around similar children around their age and just observe. Take a little bit of time, and as a result of taking time, you'll start to see, oh, okay, these children have a type about them. They have this certain type. And, because you can see their interaction style, you can see their temperament right there, even as babies, right? And that's what I was able to do with my son. And I had typed him as ISTP. And honestly, he was ISTP for a long time. And then after a while, my INFJ mentor got to know my son. And my son started behaving from a very ESTP standpoint, which was kind of interesting. So he had actually quadra shifted into ESTP mode for a little while. It was all about being extroverted, hanging out with people, initiating with people consistently, trying to show people things on a regular basis. It was great. But then something happened. Something happened to my son, and that is the birth of his sister. And his sister, who was very ISTJ-ish for like the longest time. Now she's more ENFP, and she also quadra shifted, into ENFP. So now she's ENFP. My son, when she was born, quadra shifted from being an STP to an INFJ, and he's still INFJ to this day. Here's a great example of my son's behavior as being an INFJ. One time, they were both, I put them down for a nap one day, and they were staying for many days over the course of a weekend. I put them both down for a nap, and my son's like, oh, okay. He gets up, after they're sleeping for an hour, and he comes out and he asks, okay, Dad, can I play Legos? I'm like, sure, you can play Legos. It's all good. So he starts playing Legos, and he's having fun. And then my daughter wakes up. She comes out of the bedroom crying her face off. Where's my brother? Where's my brother? Oh, the guilt on my son's face. Oh, the guilt. He was really having a hard time. I picked her up. I held her. She was okay. Everything was fine. Everything was good after that, right? Well, guess what? The following day, same thing happened again. Only this time when my son got up, he actually stayed put in the bedroom while his sister slept, and he would not leave the bedroom until after she left. So that when she woke up, he was still there, and then they were able to exit the room together, and she's this ENFP and my son's this INFJ, and they have a golden pair with one another. That's why they're like the best of friends and everything, and they just can't live without each other, etc. Well, my sister or his sister, she's very happy. She comes out all bright-eyed and whatnot. And I just go over to my son and I get on my knees and I give him a hug and I tell him how proud I am of him because that he was willing to go that far and give him that recognition, as an INFJ that he needs, right? But I've noticed my own children quadra shifting, right? I've noticed that myself, my own experience quadra shifting as well. However, as great as the theory of the quadra shift is, and in the cognitive development of children is, which is what we're going to call theory one, my INFJ mentor would like to position a different theory, and I do not often talk about my mentor and how some of his theories differ from mine. But for the sake of this audience, this is definitely something I would like to actually make available for discussion. Now, granted, I'm going to be doing individual lectures pretty soon, detailing both of these theories, so that we're going to basically get the input and the feedback from the audience itself within the YouTube comments about how all of this works and whatnot. Definitely something we're going to be doing. But until then, I wanted to share with the patrons at least, hey, how do you guys, what do you guys think? Which theory is valid? One thing I would like to say though, theory number two, and I'm about to go into it here in a second, it actually fits inside of theory one. It could actually be possible that both theories are true. It's actually possible. It's possible that both theories could coexist simultaneously. It's also possible that one is not true and the other is true. So you got to understand that my INFJ mentor, he's kind of from like an older school of thought, kind of slightly more traditional than my theories. My theory is a little bit more cutting edge, whereas his is slightly older school of thought. Although I will say that his theories are not readily accepted by the community, in as much as mine are not readily accepted by the community either. So just to give you guys like an idea that there is some differences between us and what others espouse or what they say, etc. So let's talk about theory two. So here's his theory: cognitive development in children, according to my INFJ mentor, Mr. R.P. Morial. And so his point is that children, especially children who are healthy, happy, have good relationships with their parents and good relationships with siblings. And if you notice, all of those are prerequisites for this to take place. Children naturally gravitate uninhibited towards their inferior function. And because they gravitate towards their inferior function, when a person is in childhood, Now he says that there's no such thing as a quadra shift. He maintains that a child is not necessarily born with a quadra and doesn't move, between those four sides of their mind per se. What he thinks happens is that you're born with your ego, and that's your ego. Period. End of story. That's it. However, his version of the quadra shift is that because if a child is very healthy, right? If they're very healthy, if they find themselves in a situation where they're in a good family, they have good relationships with siblings, and it's a very healthy environment. What children end up doing, they gravitate towards their gateway functions. Now, if they're in a very negative environment, if they're in a very negative relationships with siblings and parents, they're going to gravitate more towards their nemesis function. Whereas in a more healthier environment, they're going to gravitate towards their inferior function, the next gateways. And what happens is that a child who is in that super healthy mode, because they're gravitating more towards their inferior function, they start developing their inferior function at an early age such that they become aspirational. What does this mean? This means that an ENTP child like myself would have actually behaved like an ISFJ more so as a child up until, trauma either hit or there were some life changes that, such as my sister being born and the competition for attention with parents, etc. Because I will admit I did kind of feel a little unwanted as a child after my sister was born. And I remember having that cognitive shift, in that scenario. But his argument is that, because you're focusing on the inferior function, it's, the child is being aspirational. And because they're being aspirational, they're focusing on their subconscious side, and they're living more so in their subconscious than any other time in their entire life. And you always hear about the stories of people trying to go back into childhood, for example, trying to get back. And you usually hear it from SJs, because SJs almost always say that they're living like backwards, especially ESTJs. I don't know how many times I've heard ESTJs talk about how they live life backwards. It's kind of interesting to me. But, and that's because they remember being able to have the freedom of being so aspirational as children, basically. And okay, I could see that. That makes a lot of sense to me. So his argument is basically that I always was an ENTP. That's his argument. And he also argued that, I was ISFJ when I was in that, what we call happy chase. And then when everything started falling apart, I gravitated away from my inferior function, went more towards my nemesis function, and went INTJ mode, and it was that way the entire time. And his point of view is that, with children, and then obviously adolescence has nothing to do with my mentor's theory at all, right? So these are the two competing theories. Now, how do these theories actually fit together? Let's talk about that. So if we're going to assume that his theory and my theory are mutually exclusive, that basically means that your ego is your ego when you're born, right? It just straight is. Your ego is your ego when you're born. According to him, that wouldn't be the case. But let's assume that actually that was. Let's assume it was. Let's assume that my theory is correct, that there is still a quadra, and then you do definitely quadra shift as, because I don't have enough data. See, if I had enough data, I could know for sure what it is, but I just don't have enough data because I haven't had enough children. I haven't been around children a very long time. If I get married again, perhaps I'll consider having another child. But honestly, I don't have any more children, and I lack the SI data to be able to know for sure. With various anecdotal evidence, and I'm not around enough children anyway to have the SE data either to make that known. So be that as it may, how can his theory coexist with mine? His theory could coexist based on whether or not, if we assume that it is possible that there is actually, access to the entire side of the quadrant, you can quadra shift throughout your age, etc., between those two theories. If we're assuming that's correct, there's nothing to stop us from being more aspirational and being more focused on our subconscious or us to being more worried and focusing on our unconscious throughout our cognitive development as children. There's nothing stopping that. So if we just remove that one little requirement from his theory compared to mine in terms of cognitive development of children, then it's a little bit different, right? They actually could coexist, right? And that's the difference, right? That's the difference between between all three scenarios. So anyway, based on that, I wonder if anyone here has actually had the opportunity to look at children or your own children and notice these things. I have talked about both theories with a lot of people, and I'm seeing arguments for both sides. Actually, I'm really seeing arguments for both sides, and it's really sad to me that we just don't have enough data to know for sure. As an ENTP, I'm constantly keeping track of everything and trying to give myself, as much information as possible so that I can make those judgments. Oh yeah, so we have Yusuf here saying that he noticed with all his children that they changed with more siblings. Yusuf, if you want, I'll give you the floor, and you could actually explain that a little bit more on voice for us, if you'd be willing to, sir. I can unmute you if you want and whatnot. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Yeah, I have 4 children now, and one is recently born. And one thing that I did notice is not the change in their personalities, but when they are together or in the house together, they do behave differently. So between each other, but whenever I take them alone, what I also do every week, I also take one alone to do something. And then I notice that they're back into old habits. So I think therefore the second theory applies more.
Fair enough. I would like to add to that, with the children. Sometimes when I'm in the presence of a bunch of people, I have a tendency to cognitive transition, right? So if I get if I'm in a new social situation and I don't know people, I'm uncomfortable, so I cognitive transition into my ISFJ side, right? Which is fine. But and I think that may fit as to what may be happening, Yusuf, with your children in that regard, that they might be transitioning when they're around other people or around each other versus when they're themselves, etc., to be closer to their true selves is when they're by themselves, etc. So it might be a transition, or are we actually, or is this something that you're noticing over time that would fit the second theory, basically?
No, it's something that I do notice over time.
All right,
so
fair enough.
The interests also are still the same when they are apart, and the way of interacting.
All right, fair enough. Well, that's good. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, fair enough. No takers. That's all right. Anyway, I find both theories very fascinating. I just wish I had a little bit more evidence to support my theory in terms of the quadra shift. But if as experience would dictate, it would seem that just from an Occam's razor point of view, if we're really going to look at it from a very logical, objective point of view, if we're going to compare both theories, considering Occam's razor, which is like the option that has the least amount of effort to explain, is more likely to be the closest to the truth. If we're going to look from an Occam's razor point of view, then the second theory would win for sure. And I can argue that the second theory is true, even from my own anecdotal experience. I can argue it. And number 2 for children. So based on that, going forward, what do I have to do personally? Because I don't have enough evidence. I just don't, unless someone else has more evidence, within this community or within this audience to prove otherwise. I have no choice but to accept that my mentor's point of view with cognitive development in children is actually the standard. I really have no choice but to accept it because I just don't have any other evidence to prove otherwise. I for a long time I maintained that my theory of quadra shift was how it is and how it has to be, but when it comes to children, but honestly, like I can't. There's not enough information to prove it more correct than my mentor's theory, where children are more aspirational growing up. So anyway, just as members of this audience, please take some time and think about it, and think about your own children or children that you've been in contact with, and see if you can apply both theories. See if it really is applied. If you can actually observe an actual quadra shift happening, or if it's really happening, if it's really actually just a cognitive transition, with children being more uninhibited, right, and able to aspire and be more in tune with their subconscious at younger ages, right? Okay, awesome, Yusuf. That would be great if you could do that. There's so many different ways of going about this. I mean, unless I can get more evidence for theory two, but like I said, I still just can't categorically prove point in time. And I mean, we see this all the time, even with the MBTI test itself. We consistently see it because the MBTI test itself, when you're using the letter dichotomies and you're actually testing somebody based on the letter dichotomies, when you're actually doing that, what ends up happening? Like seriously, what ends up happening? A lot ends up happening, because this is why people, when they test, it's like, oh, I'm very INFJ, but then, but I'm testing as an ISTP right now. Those kinds of results happen all the time, where like one letter is off, basically, when you're taking the MBTI test. And I could make that argument. So it's super hard to type children. It's really hard, but it can be done. It can be done. I have successfully done it over time while looking at, the type grid and utilizing the type grid to type children. It can work, but I will also admit that in those days, this is about 7 years ago, it was really hard I did not have as much mastery of the science as I do now as I could have had, or as I did then. I mean, I wish I had my mastery now, so that I could have, at that point in time, so that I could have been more accurate with typing my son. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that my first theory of quadra shift involving child development could be incorrect. It could be completely incorrect. The reason why is because I'm basing it on information that's 7 years old at a time where I did not have the mastery and the skill that I do now. And my son, he's not an infant anymore. So he's not like less than 2 years old. So, I missed out on that window, missed out on that opportunity to try to get the answer to that question and know for sure. But regardless of however I look at it, theory number two always fits. It always fits. I can't, as much as I think about it, I can't disprove it. I just can't. And as much as I don't have enough evidence or experience to prove to TI parent within myself that yes, theory number one is correct. So anyway, what does that mean? It means that I'm going to be going out of my way to demonstrate to this audience in those lectures, and basically ask the audience this question. Probably happening over next month sometime. I'm going to ask them this question. Okay, which theory do you think is true, and why? And post it in the comments, or et cetera. Like, because I really want to get some feedback here. I want to know which theory people think is true, even though I already know, based on right now, it would seem theory number two, from an Occam's razor standpoint, is the most likely to be true, and will probably end up being the most readily accepted theory. But at least keep theory one in the back of your mind, the theory of quadra shift. It may actually be a thing. I just don't have enough evidence to prove that. And until then, I kind of have to rely on my mentor's theory in terms of child's cognitive development in the meantime. So anyway, based on that, does anyone here have any questions they'd like to